I'm a 28-year-old woman, engaged to a man named Daniel. We've been together for almost 4 years now, and I thought I knew everything about him, his family, and what we were building. But let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for what happened when his parents stepped into the picture. We were in the final stages of planning our wedding. Everything was coming together, except for one thing. The elephant in the room. His parents. And when it came to the wedding, they seemed to think they had a say in everything. Sure, I expected a little advice here and there. After all, they're his family. But I never imagined they'd take control of something as personal as how much my husband should pay for me. You read that right. They actually wanted a bride price. Not just a small token of affection or tradition, but a huge amount. Like, a really huge amount. The kind of money that made my jaw hit the floor when I heard it. I'm not talking about a reasonable sum that makes sense for a wedding or even a show of respect for the bride's family. No. This was far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. At first, I thought it was a joke. Maybe some kind of tradition I didn't fully understand. But when Daniel's mom sat me down and gave me the figure, it hit me like a ton of bricks. She smiled, and I'll never forget that smile, so calm, so assured. She wasn't playing around. This wasn't a suggestion. It was an expectation. It's not like Daniel didn't try to warn me. Over the course of our relationship, he'd always told me about his family's cultural traditions and how his parents had high expectations. But this was on another level. I kept waiting for him to step in, to do something. But he just sat there. Silent. Almost apologetic. Maybe he was stuck between wanting to respect his family's wishes and not upsetting me. I don't know. But when I saw the numbers on paper, when I realized what they were asking for, I couldn't breathe. My stomach twisted. That wasn't love. That wasn't family. It felt like they were trying to sell me off. I didn't know if I was being too sensitive, but in that moment, everything felt wrong. And that's why I knew. I had to make a decision. A tough one. A decision that could shatter everything I had built with Daniel, and yet, something about their demand felt so off that I couldn't ignore it. I'll admit, I was terrified. What would happen to our relationship? What would happen if I stood up to them? Would Daniel back me up, or would he crumble under the pressure? And worst of all, if I refused, would I be branded as the woman who wrecked everything for a price tag? I spent sleepless nights going over it in my mind. What was the right thing to do? I loved Daniel, I really did. But how could I marry into a family that saw me as an object to be bought? It made my skin crawl. And yet, every time I thought about the wedding, about the life I imagined building with Daniel, I felt torn. But that was before the phone call that changed everything. I called off the wedding. But that wasn't the end. Not by a long shot. It felt like a relief at first, like a weight lifting off my chest. But then, things took a turn. What I didn't expect was that it would come to this. What I didn't expect was that they would try to manipulate me even more. To make me feel small. To make me feel like I had no choice. And you know what? I wasn't having it. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control. About respect. About standing up for myself when everything was pushing me to just stay quiet and accept their greed. I wasn't going to let it slide. So, I did something bold. Something that felt reckless in the moment, but right in the end. And when it all came crashing down, I couldn't believe how much I had underestimated my own strength. Things didn't just fall apart for me and Daniel. No, they fell apart for his family too. In ways I could never have imagined. But let me start from the beginning. You need to know how it all happened. how his parents' insatiable greed nearly destroyed everything, and how I took control of the situation. This is where the real story begins. It was the night before our wedding when everything went down. Well, technically, it wasn't our wedding anymore. It was just mine now, since I'd already called it off. I guess, to be honest, I didn't know what I was expecting when I broke the news to Daniel. Was I looking for him to beg? To stand up to his parents for me? Maybe a little of both. What I didn't expect was the way things spiraled. It all happened so fast, and I was left standing there, not even sure if I'd made the right choice anymore. The evening was supposed to be calm. I had packed my things, leaving behind the memories of the bridal dress hanging in the room we had spent months preparing for. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, my phone in hand, staring at a message from Daniel. He said he was on his way over to talk. I couldn't decide if I was relieved or nervous as hell. We hadn't spoken much since I called off the wedding 2 days ago. He hadn't even come by to see me. Not that I blamed him. What do you say to someone when you know you failed them? But when he walked in, I could tell right away that he wasn't the same person I knew. He was tense, his eyes wide, and he couldn't seem to find the right words. The moment he sat down, I felt it, this awkward, suffocating silence. Then he just said it. "You know I love you, right?" he began, but I could already tell where this was going. The words didn't feel real anymore. They felt rehearsed. I nodded, trying to hold it together, but inside, I was breaking. How could he say that to me? After everything, after the phone calls with his mom and dad demanding this ridiculous bride price, he still tried to act like everything was normal. Like it was all just a misunderstanding. That's when I realized this wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about some customs from his family, it was about something deeper. His family had already set their expectations on who he was supposed to be, and I was just some pawn in their game. "I know," I said, cutting him off before he could say anything else that felt more like an apology than a solution. "But this isn't love. If you really loved me, you wouldn't let your parents treat me like I'm some kind of property." His face flushed. I could see the fight in his eyes. But then, as if a switch had flipped, his posture slumped. "I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do. They won't stop. You don't understand, they can't understand. It's tradition." His words trailed off, like he was trying to convince himself just as much as he was trying to convince me. Tradition. The word hit me like a slap. For the past few weeks, I tried to be understanding, tried to hold on to the idea that maybe this was just some ancient practice they were clinging to. But when they came to me with that price, that absurd amount of money, the whole thing started to feel more like a scam than a custom. They weren't just asking for a token of respect or some kind of gesture, they were demanding a price so high it made me question whether they really saw me as their son's future wife or just a business transaction. "I don't care about tradition, Daniel," I snapped, the anger bubbling up now. "Your family is trying to buy me. I'm not a thing. This isn't just about a number on a piece of paper. This is about them trying to control me, and you, too." The silence between us grew thick, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd finally get it. But then, the phone rang. And of course, it was his mom. I could see the panic in his eyes as he glanced at me. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening on the other end of the line. "I'll talk to her," he said, standing up, his voice shaking. "Please, just give me a minute." I stood frozen, the room feeling like it was closing in. But I could hear everything. I could hear his mom's voice, demanding that he fix it, that he had to fix it. She was angry. She wasn't asking for a compromise. She was telling him that it had to be done her way, or there would be consequences. I could hear the desperation in his voice as he tried to explain things, to make it sound like I was just being difficult. And that was when it hit me. He wasn't standing up for me. He was trying to make it seem like I was the problem. I had a choice in that moment. I could stay quiet, go back to the way things were, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or I could keep fighting. I could expose everything. Lay bare the truth of what his parents were doing and how far they were willing to go. But as I listened to Daniel beg his mother on the phone, I realized something else. He wasn't just stuck between me and his parents. He was already choosing them. And that's why I knew I couldn't back down. Not now, not ever. The days that followed were a blur. It was like living in two different worlds at once, one where everything was falling apart, and one where I was trying my best to hold it together. Daniel tried to call me every day, but I ignored most of his texts and calls. How could I look at him, knowing that he was still under the thumb of his parents? Every time I saw his name pop up on my phone, my stomach twisted. But then, there were the moments when I started to think about my own future. About the life I had planned before all of this started. I had been so focused on my relationship with Daniel that I hadn't really thought about the fact that I had goals and dreams of my own. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I could achieve any of them with him. Not with the way his family was calling all the shots. It wasn't just the bride price. No, that was just the tip of the iceberg. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much control they had over him. It was like I was marrying him, but I was also marrying them. They wanted to dictate every aspect of our lives, from where we lived to how we spent our money, and it made me feel suffocated. I started to tell my friends what happened. At first, I didn't want to share it. I felt embarrassed, honestly. I kept thinking, why didn't I see this coming? But as I began to explain everything, their responses were mixed. Some of them couldn't believe it. Others thought I was being dramatic. But there was one thing they all agreed on: I deserved better. I deserved to be with someone who was willing to stand up for me, someone who didn't let their family dictate everything. It was clear that I couldn't keep quiet about this. I had to speak up, not just for myself, but for the other women who might be in the same position, women who felt like they couldn't challenge these traditions, these old, outdated customs. I didn't know if Daniel would ever understand. But I did know this: his parents needed to be exposed for what they were doing. They were greedy, and they were using their son as a pawn in a little game of power and control. One afternoon, about a week after I called things off, I sat down and drafted a post. It was raw. It was real. And it was the hardest thing I had ever written. But I felt like it was the only way to get the truth out there, to make people understand what I was going through. I wasn't just some girl throwing a tantrum because she didn't get her way. This was bigger than me. I went back and forth, rewording the post 100 times. It had to be perfect, but it also had to be honest. I needed to make sure that anyone who read it would understand the magnitude of what I was exposing. The greed, the manipulation, the suffocating pressure his family had put on me. After what felt like an eternity of writing and editing, I hit post. I sat there, staring at the screen. My heart was pounding. I thought I'd be relieved once I finally shared the truth. Instead, all I felt was a sickening wave of dread. What if this made things worse? What if Daniel never spoke to me again? What if his parents came after me, or worse, tried to ruin my reputation? The post took off faster than I could have ever imagined. People were commenting, sharing their own experiences, some of them with families who had tried to pull the same stunt. Others shared stories of how they had been forced into uncomfortable situations because of similar demands. And then, there were those who just couldn't believe what I was saying, calling me crazy or accusing me of exaggerating the situation. But it didn't matter. The more I read through the comments, the more I realized that exposing this was the right thing to do. I wasn't alone in this. I wasn't the first to face this kind of thing, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be the last. Then, Daniel showed up. He came to my apartment, knocking at the door in the middle of the night, his face pale and filled with fear. "You posted it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I could tell he was upset. But there was something else too, something that looked like guilt. Was he finally starting to see the truth? Or was he angry that I'd gone public with our personal business? "I had to," I said, my voice firm, even though I was shaking inside. "You and your parents have been trying to manipulate me for months. This isn't just about some wedding money. This is about you being willing to let your family control every aspect of our lives. I'm not going to stand for it." "You don't understand," he said, his hands running through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him do 1,000 times when he was stressed. "You don't understand what they'll do to me if I don't go along with this." I shook my head, the frustration bubbling up again. "What about what you're doing to me, Daniel? What about my life? My future? You think this is okay?" He looked down, clearly torn, but I could see the conflict on his face. For the first time, I didn't think he was just trying to make it work for everyone. For the first time, I thought he might actually be realizing how far his family's control went. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. I had already made my choice. I wasn't going back to a man who wasn't strong enough to stand up for me. I wasn't going back to a family that saw me as a transaction. I knew things had reached a boiling point when Daniel's parents showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting them to come, not like this. Honestly, I thought the whole thing would just fizzle out, and they'd move on to something else. But no, there they were, his mom, his dad, standing on my doorstep like it was a regular Sunday afternoon. Their faces were unreadable, but I could see the tension in their eyes. They weren't here to apologize, and they sure as hell weren't here to make amends. The moment I opened the door, his mother wasted no time. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me like she owned the place. I wanted to snap back, tell her to get out of my apartment, but I knew she wasn't going anywhere without a fight. "We're not done with this," she continued, her voice cold and sharp. "You embarrassed our family. Your post, it's causing a scandal. You've made us look like money-hungry people. You need to take it down, and we can move on." "Take it down?" My heart pounded in my chest. I could feel the rage bubbling up, threatening to explode. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the fire that was burning inside me. "I won't take it down. What you've done to me, what you tried to do, it's out there now. People need to know what you're about." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you can destroy everything we've built? You think you can ruin Daniel's future just because of a few petty misunderstandings? You were the one who caused all this, not us." I couldn't believe it. She was still trying to turn this around on me, still trying to make me feel like the villain in this twisted story. But I wasn't backing down. "Not now. Are you serious right now?" I took a step forward, my hands shaking with anger. "You're the ones who tried to buy me like I was some object. You're the ones who wanted to sell your son's happiness for money. And now you want me to take the blame for your greed?" Daniel's dad finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. "Listen, we're not here to argue with you. We just want you to understand. This is about family. About respect. This is how things are done." "Respect?" I laughed, the sound bitter. "You want respect? Then maybe stop treating me like a piece of property. Maybe you should have respected me enough to see me as your son's partner, not a price tag." I could see them both stiffen, the weight of my words hitting harder than I expected. But it wasn't enough. They weren't backing down, and neither was I. I was done. "Where's Daniel?" I asked, my voice suddenly cold. They exchanged a look. "He's in the car," his mom said. "He didn't want to come in." But you need to understand, he's torn. He's trying to make peace. Trying to make peace? I scoffed. By letting you walk all over me? Just as I finished speaking, I heard the car door slam outside. I didn't even need to look out the window to know who it was. The moment Daniel walked through that door, I knew it was over. He was silent at first, standing in the doorway, his eyes flicking back and forth between me and his parents. His face was flushed, his hands were in his pockets. He didn't look like the man I'd once known, the confident, decisive guy I'd fallen for. He looked lost. "Daniel," I said softly, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "This has gone on long enough. Your family has made it clear how they feel about me. About us. But you're not even here anymore, are you? You're already lost to them. You've already chosen them over me." He took a deep breath, and for a second, I thought he might say something, anything that would make me feel like maybe, just maybe, he still cared. But he didn't. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to lose you, but I don't want to lose my family either." That was it. The moment I knew I couldn't save him. He was too far gone. I stood there, feeling the finality of it all hit me like a punch to the gut. This was over. "You don't get to choose between me and them, Daniel," I said, each word feeling heavier than the last. "Because I already made my choice. I'm not going to spend my life fighting your family's battles. I deserve someone who chooses me, who chooses us." For a long time, there was nothing but silence. Daniel didn't move, didn't say anything. His parents didn't look at me, but I could feel their presence like a weight on my chest. And then, Daniel did the one thing I wasn't expecting. He walked toward the door. "I'm sorry," he said. And just like that, he was gone. I stood there, the words hanging in the air, feeling like I'd just lost everything. I don't know what I expected, but I didn't expect it to feel so empty. I had just lost the man I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with, and yet, there was this sense of clarity that settled over me. It was like a weight lifted. I knew I'd made the right choice. I'd taken back my power, my voice, my dignity. I had called out the greed, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small again. But little did I know, this wasn't over. Not yet. The fallout had only just begun. I won't lie, the weeks after Daniel walked out were brutal. There were nights I spent crying, my face buried in my pillow, wondering if I had made the right choice. I'd lost a fiancé, sure, but I also lost the dream I had built around him. The life I had imagined, our wedding, our future together, had crumbled into dust. There were moments when I thought I couldn't do it. The loneliness was suffocating. The uncertainty of everything, the endless questions, gnawed at me. Did I really have to go through all of this just to stand up for myself? Was it worth it? But then something unexpected started to happen. I began to feel this shift. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't easy. It was gradual, like waking up after a long, dark night. Slowly, I started to remember who I was before all of this. I remembered the woman who had dreams of her own, the woman who didn't need anyone's approval to chase them. I wasn't just someone's fiancé or some family's prize. I was me, strong, independent, and capable of building my own future. I kept reading the comments on my post. Some were supportive, others downright hateful. But what stuck with me were the stories from other women, other people who had been manipulated, used, or silenced by families with expectations that didn't align with their own lives. It was like this huge collective wave of support washed over me. I wasn't alone. I wasn't crazy for walking away from a situation that didn't serve me. People understood, and that made all the difference. Over time, the noise started to quiet down. Daniel tried reaching out, sending me a few texts here and there, but I never responded. What was there to say? What could he possibly say that would make me forget everything? He'd made his choice. He'd chosen to stay in the shadow of his family instead of stepping into the light of his own life. And I couldn't live in that shadow anymore. But that wasn't the end of it. Oh no! Daniel's parents weren't going to let this go. I'm not sure what they expected after everything I'd exposed, but they certainly didn't expect me to stand my ground like I did. They started sending messages, emails, phone calls, even letters, to try to convince me to take everything down. They promised they would apologize. They said that if I just let it go, we could all move on. It was laughable, really. They thought I'd just forget the way they treated me, the way they treated their own son, as if none of it had ever happened. They wanted me to pretend like their greed wasn't front and center, like they hadn't tried to barter me off for a price. But I didn't back down. I never took the post down, and I never apologized for calling them out. I wasn't going to erase the truth just to make them comfortable. And you know what? The longer I held my ground, the more it felt like a weight lifting off my chest. The more I stopped thinking about them and started focusing on what came next, the easier it became. I spent time with my friends, my real support system. I threw myself into work, into projects that had been gathering dust in the background. I focused on growing. One day, as I was walking to a coffee shop, I saw Daniel. He didn't see me at first, but I saw him, standing there, looking lost. I hadn't seen him in weeks, and in that moment, I felt this strange calm wash over me. He was still wearing that same look, the one that had been there the last time we saw each other. The uncertainty, the confusion, the guilt. But I was different now. I wasn't the woman who would fold under pressure anymore. I kept walking. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. Because I had already made peace with what happened. I had already made peace with the fact that sometimes, you have to let go of what you thought was yours to find what's actually meant for you. And Daniel? He wasn't meant for me. Not in the way I'd thought. It wasn't easy, and it didn't feel like victory at first. But with time, I realized that the real victory was in choosing myself. It was in the strength I found in that decision, the strength to stand up for what I knew was right, even when the world tried to tell me otherwise. I wasn't just walking away from a man or a family, I was walking toward my own future, on my own terms. And as for Daniel and his parents, I can't say I ever truly forgave them. What they tried to do to me, to manipulate and control me for their own gain, that kind of thing doesn't just fade away. But I didn't need to forgive them to move on. I didn't need them to acknowledge the harm they caused to find my peace. At the end of the day, I learned that I was enough on my own. I didn't need anyone's validation. I didn't need anyone's permission to be happy. And most importantly, I didn't need anyone to define my worth. I knew who I was, and that was all that mattered.